here to talk about an idea that's been with me for many years, and it's whether or not there's a good germ that might change a whole society at scale. Is there something that exists out there that is infectious and causes people to live more positive, more happy lives? This started a long, long time ago for me. In the mid-90s, I was asked if I would come in and chair the board of the Auckland City Mission. It was broke, and it was broken. One of the things that was broken was a house for abused young girls called the Kathleen North House. And we had a problem because they were being abused inside our house. So I shut it, which was tough, and it was controversial, and we had to place everybody somewhere else for a period. And I said, I'm sorry, but we are not having one young girl hurt on my watch. And what we did was we went looking. Dame Diane Robertson, who became the Auckland City Missioner, who's a fabulous person, scoured the world for programs that will help young girls who have been abused. And we found a program, bear in mind this is a long while ago, in Texas for post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. And that's a way of actually helping rewire people, especially children who have had real abuse, real trauma. And one of the stories that stuck with me from the board papers for that was a story about a young girl who went through that program. She had seen her mother murdered. She had been abused, and she was catatonic when she came into it. She recovered, they rewired her, and she went back to live with her aunt and her uncle in a cottage in a poor area. And you know what she did? She started cleaning the area of the cottage she was living in, and she scrubbed, and she scrubbed, and she scrubbed, and she cleaned her part of the house. But the most remarkable thing that happened next was her auntie then cleaned the kitchen, and her uncle cleaned the living room. And before long, half a street had cleaned their houses. And I wondered, is there something that is infectious about that kind of thing, that inspires people to make more sense of their surroundings, to live better, to cleanse our souls and our surroundings? Does that exist? Not long after that, we opened that house, and I met a number of the girls who were being admitted into it, and I was introduced to a little 10-year-old, and I knelt down to talk to her, eye to eye, and she scooted round the back of Diane's legs and peered out at me with these gorgeous big brown eyes. She'd been abused and she needed care. And I stood there ashamed that I would cause that reaction in a beautiful young girl just by being there and being a male. And one of the things that made it difficult is that a long time ago, I was her. And I knew how she felt. And the story of these two girls stayed with me for a long time, and I wondered, is there something you can do about this? Fast forward 20 years, and I'm standing in the Auckland University Pacifica Whālei, and we're launching, we being Te Papa, which I chair the board of, as Sarah mentioned, we're launching a book called Tangata o le Moana. And the book, which many of you may know, is the first official publication celebrating the lives of Pacifica people in New Zealand as New Zealanders. And I watched 700 or 800 people walking taller and walking more proudly because someone was telling their stories and their culture and saying how fabulous this is. They were walking taller and more proudly because of that, a whole 700 or 800 people. My wife was in Hong Kong at that point visiting our newest grandchild, and I sat up all night and I read the book. And I came out to South Auckland and I had a look at the communities of South Auckland, and I was just blown away by the richness of the communities and cultures that exist here. But that's not what you hear on television or publicly. And I thought, what would happen if we, Te Papa, came out to South Auckland and did this 24/7 for 10 years? What would happen? Would it actually improve the way people thought about themselves? Would it improve the community? Would people live more positive lives by discovering the richness that in fact exists amongst us? Is that possible? Is it possible to do it at scale? This is 500,000 people, roughly. And I realised the part of the solution, its only part, was right under my nose. And that is that it is possible to make significant change to the culture of a big community. And this is how you do it. First, you've got to have scale. So if you've got a big community of 500,000 people, you've got to have about 500,000 people coming through the door a year, or as we do in Wellington, which is a little city of 180,000 in the CBD, 1.5 to 2 million, or we're about 1.7 million. That's 5,000 people a day. So you need scale. The second thing you need is a network, or networks plural. You need people with economic, social, and cultural power lined up together. If you get that, you can start changing things. The third thing you need is cultural authority. You need to be authoritative, carefully researched, cautious in your findings of fact, and credible. The fourth thing you need is empathy. You cannot do open heart surgery on a culture without holding and almost being that beating open heart. And in many ways, that's the heart of the dilemma of modern social policy, which is, as we found at the Auckland City Mission, that when you're right up close, when you are intimate, when you do have empathy, when you feel that beating heart, generally you don't have the resource. Generally, you're struggling for money and you're struggling for people to help you. But at the other end, the people with the money and the people with the power are too far away to be really effective. And that's a real dilemma in our society, and it's one we need to crack. And I propose to do that. The fifth thing you need is to be affirmative. You need to build people up, not tear them down. Then the sixth thing you need to change a whole culture is a sticky, psychological, educational program that actually sticks. When you throw mud at the wall, you want it to stick if you're doing something educationally. You want to just throw it at the wall and have it stick. Now, this here is an exhibition that we're running. Gallipoli, the scale of our war, I'd love to bring it here. We made it with Weta Workshop. You actually live in a movie when you're there because it's sound, image, real huge characters. Richard Taylor and I agreed the way to do this and make it effective was for it to be an emotional connection with people 100 years ago. That's what we wanted, an emotional link. What we've got is an audience of about 800,000 in the first year. That's about half the population of Auckland, the equivalent of it, have been through it. 98% of people say it was incredibly positive, and it's blown all of the records for what people call follow-up. That is, people reporting they're going to do something about it. And what it did was to expose the people who are seeing this exhibition to the character and the people who were there in a manner that's really effective, and it changes people's lives when that happens. Think of the last time you went to something or did something that moved you deeply. And think of whether that maybe had some influence about what you did next, or maybe even what you do today. I have a friend, my wife and I have a friend who is a woman who's internationally successful. She's tough, she's soft, she's very successful. I was at dinner in Wellington, she came over to me and I could see I was in trouble. I knew as she was walking towards me in the restaurant, I was in trouble. And she said to me, "I've got a bone to pick with you," pointing at me. She said, "I've got a bone to pick. You're the chairman of Te Papa, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Didn't you have something personally to do with that exhibition?" And I said, "Yes." And she looked at me accusingly and she said, "You made me cry." And I've got thousands and thousands of stories of how people's views of World War I, of war, of the people who lost their lives fighting for our freedom, have reacted to this. So the point I'm trying to make is that with the right conditions, it is possible to make a big change, not a little change, a big one. And that's what I'd like to do. As the board of Te Papa, we're committed to bringing to South Auckland a large museum, 20 times that size, a big, long whare. That's what we are doing. The project is not complete. We have an agreement with Auckland Council, we have an agreement with the government, and we're putting the last pieces of the funding together now. It's 15,000 square metres, 300 metres long and 50 wide. That's 3 rugby fields under one roof. It has a big storage spine down the centre because that's part of the rationale for it. But where all your taonga will be visible and accessible. And it has 7,500 square metres of open educational cultural space. We want to tell your stories, your cultures, all of the history. In fact, we don't want to tell it, we want you to tell it. And we want you to design it. Because that's the only thing that's going to give that beating heart the kind of intimacy that it needs. What I hope and want, and what our board wants, is that this will be a light on a hill, a beacon for South Auckland. Thank you very much.